Karen Thompson was not your average tourist. She was a woman with a reputation for speaking her mind, whether people liked it or not. Back in her small suburban town in Ohio, Karen was known as the kind of person who didn't back down from an argument, whether it was about parking spaces, store policies, or even misplaced mail. Her bold personality often made her the center of attention, though not always for the right reasons. But Karen didn't care. She believed in standing up for herself, no matter what. This time, however, Karen had big plans. For years, she dreamed of visiting London, the city she'd seen in countless movies and read about in books. It wasn't just the shopping or the food that excited her. It was the history, the culture, and most importantly, the royalty. Karen couldn't wait to see Buckingham Palace, the home of kings and queens, and witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony. She packed her bags, booked her tickets, and set off on what she hoped would be the trip of a lifetime. On her third day in London, Karen woke up early, determined to make the most of her visit to Buckingham Palace. The morning air was crisp, and the streets buzzed with excitement as tourists from all over the world gathered near the palace gates. Karen joined the crowd, clutching her camera and a small purse filled with essentials, including her trusty canister of pepper spray. She always carried it just in case, though she hadn't thought much about why she might need it here. As Karen approached the front of the crowd, her eyes landed on the royal guards stationed at their posts. They stood tall and still, dressed in their striking red tunics and towering bearskin hats. To Karen, they looked almost like statues, completely motionless, ignoring the chatter and laughter around them. At first, she was fascinated by their discipline. But fascination quickly turned to irritation when someone behind her accidentally bumped into her while trying to take a selfie. Karen stumbled forward, nearly dropping her camera, and muttered under her breath about how rude people could be. Her frustration grew when she noticed how everyone seemed more interested in snapping pictures than paying proper respect to the guards. Karen felt like the whole scene was chaotic and disrespectful. And then there was the guard standing closest to her. He hadn't moved a muscle, not even when a child waved enthusiastically at him or when another tourist tried to touch his hat. His unwavering stillness annoyed Karen. What's wrong with these people? She thought. They're treating this like some kind of circus. Determined to get a reaction out of the guard, or maybe just vent her growing annoyance, Karen stepped closer. She waved her hand inches from his face, shouting sarcastically, "Hey, buddy, you're not even real, are you? Just some wax figure standing there." Some people in the crowd chuckled nervously, but the guard remained silent and unmoving. Karen's irritation reached its peak. In her mind, he wasn't just ignoring her, he was mocking her. And that's when she made a decision that would change everything. Karen's frustration was bubbling over, and her patience had officially run out. She glared at the guard, her hands on her hips, as if daring him to move or say something. Anything to acknowledge her presence. But he didn't. His face remained blank, his posture rigid, and his gaze fixed straight ahead, as though she didn't exist. To Karen, this felt like a personal affront. How could someone just stand there like a statue while she was clearly trying to get his attention? She wasn't used to being ignored, and it only fueled her anger. The crowd around her continued to buzz with excitement. Tourists snapped photos, children pointed at the guards in awe, and some even tried to make them crack a smile by pulling funny faces or waving wildly. But the guards were trained professionals, conditioned to remain stoic no matter what happened. Their discipline was part of their job, but to Karen, it felt unnatural and infuriating. "What's wrong with you?" she muttered under her breath, glaring at the guard. "Are you even human?" Her irritation turned into a strange mix of curiosity and defiance. What would it take to get a reaction out of this guy? Would he flinch if she poked him? Would he blink if she waved her hand right in front of his face? Karen's mind raced with these questions, and before she could stop herself, she decided to test the limits. She leaned closer, so close that her nose was almost touching his chest, and shouted, "Hello," Earth to guard. Can you hear me? Still nothing. Not a twitch, not a blink, not even a shift in his stance. The guard might as well have been carved out of stone. Karen stepped back, shaking her head in disbelief. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment and anger. People around her were starting to notice her behavior now, some whispering to each other and others pointing discreetly. A few even chuckled, though it was clear they weren't laughing with her. They were laughing at her. Karen's pride stung. She hated feeling ridiculed, especially in public. Her mind scrambled for a way to regain control of the situation. That's when her fingers brushed against the small canister of pepper spray tucked inside her purse. She always carried it for protection, but now an idea sparked in her head, one that felt reckless, impulsive, and completely out of character even for her. He's just standing there like he owns the place, she thought bitterly. What's he gonna do, cry? He's not even real. Without stopping to think about the consequences, Karen reached into her purse and pulled out the pepper spray. Her heart pounded as adrenaline surged through her veins. Was she really about to do this? Yes, she decided. This guard needed to learn a lesson about respect, or at least show some kind of reaction. Clutching the canister tightly, Karen took a deep breath and aimed it toward the guard's face. "Let's see how tough you are now," she muttered under her breath, her lips curling into a smug grin. For a brief moment, she hesitated, wondering if she should go through with it. But her pride won out over reason. With a quick press of the nozzle, a fine mist shot out, enveloping the guard's face in a cloud of burning vapor. Time seemed to freeze. The guard staggered backward, breaking his rigid posture for the first time. His eyes watered, and he coughed violently, clutching his rifle as protocol demanded. Gasps erupted from the crowd, followed by screams of shock and confusion. Parents quickly ushered their children away, and tourists scrambled to distance themselves from the chaos. Security personnel stationed nearby sprang into action, rushing toward Karen with determined expressions. Karen stood frozen, her grin fading as reality crashed down on her. She hadn't expected this kind of reaction, not from the guard, not from the crowd, and certainly not from the authorities. Her moment of triumph turned into sheer panic as officers surrounded her, their voices stern and commanding. Within seconds, she was handcuffed and dragged away, leaving behind a scene of utter pandemonium. As she was led off, Karen couldn't help but wonder, what had she just done? The moment Karen pressed the nozzle of her pepper spray, she felt a strange mix of satisfaction and panic. For a split second, she thought she'd won, finally gotten the reaction she wanted from the stoic guard. But that fleeting sense of triumph vanished almost instantly as chaos erupted around her. The guard staggered backward, breaking his rigid posture for the first time. His eyes watered uncontrollably, and he coughed violently, clutching his rifle tightly to maintain control despite his obvious discomfort. It was clear that this wasn't part of the routine. The crowd, which had been buzzing with excitement just moments earlier, fell into stunned silence before erupting into gasps and murmurs. Parents quickly pulled their children away, shielding them from the scene unfolding in front of them. Tourists who had been snapping photos now turned their cameras on Karen, capturing every detail of what had just happened. Some looked horrified, while others seemed amused or even angry. A woman nearby shouted, "Are you serious right now?" Her voice carried over the growing commotion, making Karen feel even smaller than she already did. Before Karen could process what was happening, security personnel stationed near the palace gates sprang into action. 2 officers rushed toward her, their expressions stern and focused. One of them barked, "Step back. Drop the canister." His tone left no room for argument. Karen's hands trembled as she dropped the pepper spray onto the ground, her bravado crumbling under the weight of the situation. Another officer grabbed her arm firmly but professionally, twisting it behind her back as he placed handcuffs around her wrists. "You're under arrest," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Anything you say can be used against you in court." Karen's heart sank. Arrest. Court. This couldn't be real. She opened her mouth to protest, stammering, I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was just messing around." But her words were drowned out by the noise of the crowd and ignored by the officers, who were already leading her away from the scene. As they escorted her through the throng of onlookers, Karen kept her head down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, some judging, some mocking, and others simply curious. The humiliation hit her like a tidal wave. What had started as a petty attempt to get attention had spiraled completely out of control. Her mind raced with questions. Would the guard be okay? Was she going to jail? How would she explain this to her family? Once inside the security office near the palace, things moved quickly. An officer took down her details, asking for her name, passport number, and reason for visiting the UK. Karen answered mechanically, still too shaken to fully comprehend the gravity of her actions. Meanwhile, medical staff attended to the affected guard, ensuring he received treatment for the irritation caused by the pepper spray. Thankfully, his condition wasn't severe, but the incident had disrupted one of Britain's most iconic ceremonies, a fact that wouldn't work in Karen's favor. Sitting in the small, sterile room, Karen finally allowed herself to reflect on what had just happened. She replayed the events in her mind, the taunting, the spray, the chaos, and cringed at how reckless she'd been. Her intention hadn't been malicious. She'd only wanted to provoke a reaction, maybe even share a laugh at the absurdity of it all. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was the cold reality staring her in the face. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. For the first time in years, Karen felt truly powerless. As the officers finalized her paperwork and prepared to transfer her to a local police station, she realized that her vacation, and possibly her life, would never be the same again. Karen's arrival at the local police station felt surreal, as though she had stepped into a scene from a movie, except this was her life, and there was no script to guide her through it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an unforgiving glow on the cold, sterile walls. Officers moved briskly around her, their faces unreadable, while the faint hum of keyboards and radios filled the air. She sat in a small holding area, her hands still cuffed behind her back, feeling more out of place than ever before. An officer approached her after what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. He introduced himself as Detective Harris and began explaining the severity of her actions. Karen listened intently as he outlined the charges: assault on a member of the Queen's Guard, public disturbance, and reckless behavior. Her stomach churned when he emphasized that these weren't minor offenses. They were taken very seriously due to the symbolic role of the guards and their connection to British tradition. Assaulting one of them wasn't just seen as an attack on an individual, it was considered an insult to the institution they represented. Detective Harris didn't mince words. "This isn't something we see often," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "People respect the guards because of what they stand for. What you did today goes beyond a simple prank. It's a direct violation of that respect." Karen tried to interrupt, her voice trembling as she pleaded her case. "I didn't mean any harm. I thought it would be funny. I wasn't thinking." But the detective simply nodded, clearly unmoved by her explanation. "Intent doesn't change the outcome," he replied. "You'll have to answer for your actions." As the reality of her situation sank in, Karen couldn't help but think about how quickly everything had spiraled out of control. One impulsive decision had landed her in handcuffs, sitting in a foreign police station, facing consequences she hadn't even imagined when she woke up that morning. The weight of embarrassment and regret pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She wondered how she'd explain this to her family, or if they'd even believe her side of the story. After processing her details and confiscating her belongings, including her passport, the officers escorted her to a holding cell. It was tiny, with concrete floors and walls, a single bench bolted to the floor, and a narrow window high above her head. For the first time in her life, Karen felt truly alone. The clang of the metal door shutting behind her echoed in the silence, leaving her trapped with nothing but her thoughts. She replayed the events over and over in her mind, dissecting every moment leading up to her arrest. Why hadn't she walked away when she had the chance? Why did she let her frustration get the better of her? These questions haunted her as tears welled up in her eyes. She buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by shame and fear. How could she have been so foolish? Hours passed slowly, each minute stretching into what felt like an eternity. Eventually, another officer arrived to inform her that she'd be appearing in court the following morning. "You'll have legal representation," he assured her, though his words offered little comfort. Karen barely slept that night, tossing and turning on the hard bench as anxiety gnawed at her insides. By the time dawn broke, she was exhausted, emotionally drained, and dreading what lay ahead. Despite her exhaustion, one thing became painfully clear. Karen's choices had consequences far greater than she'd anticipated. As much as she wanted to wake up and discover it had all been a nightmare, deep down, she knew this was real, and she'd have to face the fallout head-on. The courtroom was unlike anything Karen had ever experienced. It wasn't the grand, dramatic setting she'd seen in movies, but rather a modest, functional space with wooden benches, muted lighting, and an air of quiet authority. Still, the atmosphere was heavy with tension, and Karen could feel every pair of eyes in the room fixed on her as she shuffled to the defendant's seat. Her hands trembled slightly, clutching the edge of the table for support. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly out of her depth. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case. The lawyer, a sharp-dressed man with a calm yet commanding demeanor, painted Karen's actions as reckless and disrespectful. He emphasized that assaulting a member of the Queen's Guard wasn't just a personal offense. It was an attack on tradition, discipline, and national pride. "This isn't about a simple prank," he said, his voice steady and deliberate. "It's about showing contempt for institutions that are deeply cherished by millions of people." He went on to describe the incident in detail, recounting how Karen had taunted the guard before escalating to pepper spraying him. Photos from the scene were presented as evidence, including images of the chaos that followed and the guard being treated by medical staff. The photos made Karen cringe, not because they showed anything graphic, but because they captured her at her worst, her face twisted in anger, her posture defiant, her actions indefensible. When the lawyer mentioned that the story had gone viral online, referring to her as Pepper Spray Karen, she felt her cheeks burn with shame. Karen's own lawyer did his best to defend her, arguing that her actions were impulsive and not premeditated. He highlighted her lack of criminal history and insisted that she hadn't intended to cause harm or disrespect British traditions. "My client made a poor decision in the heat of the moment," he said, turning to address the judge directly. "She regrets her actions deeply and is willing to take full responsibility for them." But the judge didn't seem swayed. A middle-aged woman with a stern expression, she listened intently to both sides before delivering her verdict. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of finality. "Miss Thompson," she began, her tone firm but measured, "your behavior was unacceptable and cannot be excused. You knowingly disrupted a ceremonial event and assaulted a representative of the Crown. Such actions have consequences." The sentence came swiftly: 2 weeks in jail, a fine of several $1,000s, and a 5-year ban from returning to the United Kingdom. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, though Karen barely registered them. Her mind was blank, overwhelmed by the enormity of what was happening. As officers escorted her out, reporters waiting outside bombarded her with questions, shoving microphones into her face and snapping photos. "Do you regret your actions?" one shouted. "What do you have to say to the British public?" Another demanded. Karen kept her head down, avoiding eye contact, too humiliated to respond. Back in her cell, later that day, Karen replayed the judge's words in her mind. 2 weeks in jail, thousands of dollars in fines, a 5-year ban from England. Each consequence hit her like a punch to the gut. She thought about the dreams she'd had for this trip, the memories she'd hoped to create, and how quickly they had turned into a nightmare. But more than anything, She thought about the lessons she was learning the hard way, that actions have consequences, that respect matters, and that even small choices can ripple outward in ways you never expect. For the first time, Karen allowed herself to cry, not out of anger or frustration, but out of genuine remorse. She realized that this moment would define her for years to come, and while she couldn't undo what she'd done, she could choose how to move forward. As difficult as it was, she resolved to take responsibility for her mistakes and prove, to herself and others, that she was capable of change. Returning to Ohio was supposed to mark the end of Karen's nightmare, but in many ways, it felt like a new chapter of punishment had just begun. Stepping off the plane, she expected to find some semblance of normalcy waiting for her at home. Instead, she discovered that news of her infamous pepper spray Karen incident had traveled faster than she could have imagined. Local newspapers ran headlines about her arrest, and social media buzzed with memes mocking her actions. Friends and acquaintances who once greeted her warmly now avoided eye contact or whispered behind her back. Even strangers recognized her at the grocery store, pointing fingers and muttering comments under their breath. The isolation hit Karen hard. Back home, she'd always been the outspoken woman everyone knew, whether they liked her or not. But now, she felt like a pariah. Her once lively phone stopped ringing. Invitations to gatherings dried up completely. The loneliness gnawed at her, making her question whether anyone would ever see her as more than the woman who pepper-sprayed a royal guard. To make matters worse, her employer called her into a meeting shortly after her return. They explained that her actions had brought unwanted attention to the company and placed her on unpaid leave pending further review. Without income and facing mounting legal fees, Karen found herself drowning in stress. But perhaps the hardest part wasn't the financial strain or even the public ridicule. It was the shame. For the first time in her life, Karen truly understood how her impulsive decisions had hurt not only herself but also others. She thought about the guard she'd sprayed, the discomfort he must have endured, the disruption to his duty, and the embarrassment he likely felt. She imagined him going home that day, telling his family or friends what happened, and wondered if he blamed himself for not reacting sooner. These thoughts haunted her late at night when sleep wouldn't come, leaving her staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail over and over again. In an effort to cope, Karen tried to distract herself by staying busy. She cleaned her house obsessively, rearranged furniture, and binge-watched TV shows, anything to keep her mind off the weight of her mistakes. But no matter what she did, the guilt lingered. One evening, as she sat alone in her living room, she decided to write a letter, an apology to the guard, the royal family, and the British government. Pouring her heart onto paper, she admitted her wrongdoing and expressed deep regret for her behavior. Writing the letters didn't fix everything, but it gave her a small sense of closure, a way to acknowledge the pain she'd caused and take responsibility for it. Karen also began volunteering at a local veterans center, hoping to channel her energy into something positive. She spent hours helping organize events, serving meals, and listening to stories from retired soldiers who had served their country honorably. Their discipline, sacrifice, and quiet strength reminded her of the very qualities she'd mocked in the Royal Guard. Slowly but surely, Karen started to learn humility and gratitude. She realized how much she'd taken for granted, not just the traditions of other cultures, but also the people around her who worked tirelessly to protect and serve. Though the scars of her past mistakes remained, Karen began to feel a glimmer of hope. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could choose how to move forward. And for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible. Months passed, and Karen began to rebuild her life piece by piece. The initial wave of public ridicule had died down, but the memory of her infamous actions still lingered in the corners of her small town. While some people continued to judge her harshly, others started to notice subtle changes in her behavior. She wasn't the same Karen who had left for London, loud, brash, and unapologetic. This Karen was quieter, more reflective, and genuinely eager to make amends. One day, while volunteering at the Veterans Center, Karen struck up a conversation with an older man named Walter, a retired Marine who had served multiple tours overseas. He spoke passionately about his time in the military, sharing stories of camaraderie, discipline, and sacrifice. As Karen listened intently, she couldn't help but draw parallels between Walter's experiences and the stoic demeanor of the Royal Guard she'd once mocked. For the first time, she truly understood what it meant to embody duty and respect, not as abstract concepts, but as lived values. Walter noticed how engaged Karen was during their conversations and eventually asked why she had started volunteering there. At first, Karen hesitated, unsure if she wanted to revisit her past mistakes. But something about Walter's kind demeanor put her at ease, so she decided to share her story. She told him everything: the frustration that led to her impulsive decision, the arrest, the court case, and the overwhelming shame that followed. To her surprise, Walter didn't scold or judge her. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully and said, "We all mess up, Karen. What matters is what you do next." His words stuck with her long after their conversation ended. Inspired by his perspective, Karen decided to take another step toward redemption. She began speaking at local community events, sharing her story not to defend herself, but to warn others about the dangers of arrogance and impulsivity. Standing on stage made her nervous. She could feel the weight of judgment in the room. But she pushed through, knowing her message was important. "I let my pride get the best of me," she admitted candidly during one talk. "And because of that, I hurt someone I didn't even know. Don't make the same mistake I did." Her vulnerability resonated with many attendees. Some approached her afterward to thank her for her honesty, while others shared their own stories of regret and growth. These interactions gave Karen a renewed sense of purpose. For years, she had prided herself on being outspoken, but now she realized that true strength came from listening, learning, and taking responsibility for your actions. Karen also started advocating for cultural sensitivity, using her experience as a cautionary tale. She encouraged travelers to approach new places and traditions with curiosity rather than criticism. "Before I went to London, I thought I knew everything," she confessed during a panel discussion at a local library. "But I didn't. And when we assume we know better, we miss opportunities to connect with people and learn from them." Her advice struck a chord with audience members, especially young people planning trips abroad. Though Karen never received responses to her apology letters, she held on to hope that they had reached the right people. Whether or not forgiveness came, she knew she had done everything in her power to make things right. More importantly, she had transformed her darkest moment into a catalyst for personal growth. By embracing humility and accountability, Karen discovered a version of herself she barely recognized, one who valued empathy over ego, respect over rebellion, and understanding over assumptions. For the first time in years, Karen felt at peace. She couldn't erase her past, nor did she want to. It was part of her story. A painful chapter, yes, but also one that taught her invaluable lessons about humanity, resilience, and second chances. Years later, Karen often found herself reflecting on the incident that had changed her life so dramatically. What started as a moment of reckless impulsivity had become a defining chapter in her journey, one filled with regret, growth, and ultimately, redemption. Sitting on her porch one quiet evening, she gazed at the stars and allowed herself to revisit the memories of that fateful trip to London. The embarrassment still lingered, but it no longer consumed her. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far she had come. Karen's relationships with those around her had transformed in ways she never expected. Friends and family who had initially distanced themselves slowly began reaching out again, curious about the changes they saw in her. At first, their conversations were awkward, laced with cautious questions about her time in jail and the viral headlines. But over time, they realized this wasn't the same Karen they'd known before. She was more patient, more empathetic, and genuinely interested in listening rather than dominating every discussion. Even her employer eventually welcomed her back, impressed by the maturity she demonstrated upon returning to work. Her newfound perspective also shaped how she interacted with strangers. Gone was the woman who once demanded respect without giving it in return. In her place stood someone who approached others with kindness and humility. Whether chatting with a cashier at the grocery store or helping a lost tourist find their way, Karen made an effort to be present and thoughtful. These small acts of connection reminded her daily of the importance of treating people with dignity, a lesson she had learned the hard way. Though banned from entering the United Kingdom for 5 years, Karen dreamed of one day returning, not as a reckless tourist, but as someone who truly appreciated its culture and traditions. She kept a scrapbook filled with clippings about Buckingham Palace, photos of the changing of the guard ceremony, and notes she had written about what each symbolized to her now. To Karen, the palace represented resilience, the ability to stand tall despite challenges, much like the guards she had once failed to understand. Her advocacy work continued to grow too. Karen became a regular speaker at schools and community centers, sharing her story to inspire others to think twice before acting on impulse. Her talks weren't just cautionary tales. They were invitations to embrace self-awareness, cultural sensitivity, and accountability. "I used to think I knew everything," she would say with a wry smile. "Now I know I don't. And that's okay. Life is about learning, even when it hurts." One of the most rewarding aspects of her transformation was the impact it had on her family. Her teenage niece, Ava, looked up to her aunt in a way she never had before. "You're brave, Aunt Karen," Ava told her one afternoon after hearing her speak at a local event. "Not because you're fearless, but because you admit when you're wrong." Those words meant more to Karen than any applause or accolade ever could. As the years went by, Karen came to see her past not as a burden, but as a teacher. It taught her that mistakes, even monumental ones, don't define us unless we let them. What matters is what we do afterward, whether we choose to wallow in shame or rise above it, whether we cling to pride or embrace humility, and whether we shut ourselves off from the world or open our hearts to growth. For Karen, the choice was clear. On nights when sleep eluded her, she sometimes imagined standing outside Buckingham Palace again. This time, though, she wouldn't taunt the guards or pepper spray them. She would simply watch, marveling at their discipline and dedication, grateful for the lessons they unknowingly taught her. And though she might never step foot near the palace again, its image remained etched in her mind, a powerful symbol of the journey she had taken within herself.